All right. Hello, snowboarders of the internet. Welcome to Talkin' Tech with TC. I'm joined today by Michael Chilton, who is pretty much just a mad scientist behind snowboarding, where he is now the lead designer for Rome and Bataleon boards. He was formerly with Ride. He's moved on over to Amsterdam. Just a plethora of knowledge coming from him, where he definitely has the experience. Total ripper out there as well. Thank you for joining me, Michael.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Where did you start in snowboarding?
So I started snowboarding, grew up in South Lake Tahoe on the Nevada side. Grew up just riding on the Heavenly team there. Had some coaching growing up and did all the USASA competitions I possibly could. Eventually got like a little rep flow for product and try to do as best I could in, competing, trying to make a name through that lane. My focus was always in pipe riding and it was all I ever really wanted to do. So my edges were always really sharp and I never really figured out how to ride steel very well, but it's all fine for me now. Just grew up doing that, thought that I would kind of make a career of that, but then I think it was around like my sophomore year of college, I got beat at I think it was USASA Nationals in the open class, and I think Greg Bretz beat me at the time. He was like 16 and had braces, and I was like, I need to go to school. I'm over this. This isn't going to work out. So yeah, then full into school, did my undergrad at UNR in Reno for mechanical engineering. Kind of how I got into engineering for that was just I wanted to do product design. Always wanted to
Mm-hmm.
do like something regarding like sports products, whether it was bikes or snowboards or anything to that nature. So it was always where I wanted to go. And then after I graduated that, moved to Colorado and started grad school at University of Colorado Boulder in product design, which is a kind of a field within the mechanical engineering department. So it
Mm-hmm.
was a master's in mechanical engineering with a focus in product design, and worked at BCA, Backcountry Access, for about a year there as an intern, designing products for them first. Got a job at K2 or K2 Ride at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and became the board engineer for Ride, and then everything kind of springballed from there.
And that was your first position, was at K2 and Ride?
It was kind of like my first real position within snowboarding. I had an internship in Reno when I was an undergrad with a company called Century Snowboards. I don't know how long they were around, but they're definitely not around anymore. I would design I was mostly just helping around in the shop. I designed like a pair of I designed a ski for Ralston snow skates at one point. I doubt they use that anymore because it was so long ago. After that, it was kind of like there was a lull in me being within like snowboard design stuff, trying to just focus on school for the most part. And then when I was in Colorado, a buddy of mine who runs Moment Skis back in
Mm-hmm.
Reno, he hit me up with the opportunity to design a snowboard line for some friends that were starting a brand within their factory called Nepo. And that's actually the first time I met Avran, was bringing boards out to Colorado and going riding with him to show them off.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a really unique experience of being like, these are the first boards I actually made that I could go ride myself. I don't know if they were any good. They looked cool, but that was about all it was.
Was he the same as he is now? Was he very particular about the boards, or did he have less edge to him?
I think he was about the same. I'd say he's
Okay.
been very consistent in personality from like day one that I knew him. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
consistency is
Um,
key and true to that.
well, what did you learn with that company that you're able to bring to K2 and Ride, if anything?
With that company, it was kind of all done on my own. It was like freelance, and I had no experience in what to do beforehand, really. So I was kind of making it up a little bit as I went. And what I brought to K2 more so was just like wanting to try as many things as possible, wanting to learn as much as possible in like with all the opportunities that K2 and Ride had, because the biggest thing that I don't think a lot of people understand within that company was that, it was mostly it's ski funded. So
Mm-hmm.
you have all this ski money coming in funding snowboard development. So we had the opportunity to play with like all these materials, tools, resources, um, that were basically bought with ski money. And we wouldn't be able to have that if it was just really like snowboard money straight through. And so we could test like so many prototypes, so many different materials, so many different just ways of doing things. In the factory, you could go wander over to the ski side and see how they were doing something with a higher finish or a higher grade, just higher quality result, and try to mimic something over to that or find your own way of doing it. So there were just a lot of like really unique things that you could pull from the ski side into the snowboard side. But from my time at NEPA with that like really early stage, I would say I was almost starting from scratch at K2, because it was mostly just being really energetic and really energized to learn as much as I could, try as much as I could, and contribute as much as I could to the sport, which is all that I really wanted to do anyway. So
That's really what everybody wants to do in snowboarding, is just contribute, leave their mark on it, really. And then did you have a mentor at K2 or anything, or was it very like just guess and check work, or did like your schooling tell you pretty much, hey, this is just definitely not going to work. You don't even have to mess with this, like that sort of thing.
my boss at the time, Doug Sanders, gave me a pretty good rundown of like, you know, tools of the trade and how things were done in the past. The engineer before me also did quite a bit of work in preparing kind of a good foundation for me to work off of. And yeah, I won't say that I like redid everything for Ride, but I definitely took a lot of what they had built and the foundation that they had laid and kind of helped improve it as best I could with all those tools. Um, Definitely couldn't have learned what I did without that foundation that was set before me. So a lot of people were in place, and a lot of experience and a lot of just, tribal knowledge came through from that experience that taught me a lot and taught me how to try things, how to think through stuff, how to work within the factory was the biggest thing. The factory is a huge component to manufacture to snowboard production and how to actually design something. So being in there hands on and the amount of time that I had in the factories was, you know, invaluable.
When you're talking about the factory, they were actually sending you over to China when like to make sure all the processes were good. Can you go through that at all, or?
I would go over probably like 4 to 5 times a year for about a week or 2 weeks at a time. It's about the longest trip that I could handle mentally. The way that the factory operated was we had like a really hands-on process with the factory at the time. So we kind of like went over there to show them how to do things, like basically teach them new processes, make sure they were following the processes that we had laid out previously, work through new designs and new products and new processes that we were trying out or testing out, and basically just like help troubleshoot and put out fires on the floor, because there was just like in a few other factories and factories that I'm used to now, a lot of it is the factory owns everything they're doing, and you kind of give them, a basis to start from, and they do it from there. Whereas with the K2 and Ride factory, it was more so like we owned it all 100%. We designed all the shapes, all the core profiles, all the tooling. We developed all the SOPs, the processes. It was kind of like us telling them what to do, and a little bit less of a collaboration in a lot of senses because of that. But in that same sense, we were able to own everything and learn a lot because the factory wasn't able to hide anything, or we were basically like working with them to figure out the best ways of doing things with kind of like a starting point foundation, because you have to realize that K2 has, 50 years of experience in developing and manufacturing skis in the US. And so they brought all that knowledge when they moved out abroad, and basically teaching that to the factory was a huge component of, how their manufacturing processes worked in the past. And we were able to leapfrog onto that and utilize all of that experience in that foundation. Really good experience. The more that I've like seen it from a different perspective, the more I realize now that it was like very, very valuable time that I had there.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of making a turn on over to the Rome and Bataleon side. Do you have more challenges in the factory that you guys don't own it actually, or do they kind of
It's
stick
kind of
to your plan?
it's kind of like a different way of operating. So it's a much smaller factory than the K2 one,
Mhm.
because the K2 and Ride factory shared skis, snowboards, snowshoes, bindings, Nordic skis. They did a whole mess of stuff. The factory that we operate with for Rome and Bataleon is called Titan. We're partners with them, and they are a much smaller operation. They're only snowboards. They do a couple, side brands outside of us, but it's only snowboard based. So it's a lot smaller of an operation. It's a lot more focused because of that, you're able to kind of like, hone in and dial in things a bit more closely, but there's a little bit less people on the floor, a little bit less, less things you can pull from the different side of the factory and bring energy over to this side. At that being said, it is also an OEM factory, so they're not operating the same way that the K2 Ride factory was, where they own all their stuff, they own all their tools, they design the tools for us, but we give them the inputs, the shape, all the details for how to build the board that we want it to do. In the past, I think it was a bit more plug and play, where you'd get like, a loose sketch of this is kind of what we want to do, and they would design it for you. But I've kind of rerouted that a little bit to make sure that we are owning our designs a bit more, providing them with as much as we possibly can to give them the tools that gives us the board finish that we want it to ride like. So part of me coming in has been taking a lot more hands-on approach at the factory, being, in weekly conversations with them about production processes, quality, design, being a lot more hands-on is just kind of it's how I'm used to working with the factories. And it's been a bit of a learning process for them to accept me into that, because in most situations, if someone comes in and wants to be more hands-on, the factory might take a defensive stance, but you kind of come into it being like, this is a collaborative environment. We're working together to improve things for us both. And so it's a lot better now than it was like day one, but right now it's a very good environment. It's a very like high-end factory, very attentive. They got tons of experience. They used to run SBF back in the days. So it's, there's no lack of knowledge or experience within the group. And it's really a matter of coming in and helping to like take my experience from K2 Ride and help educate and, build on the foundation that they have at this place as well. So
going back a little bit to Ride, just because, I mean, as I've been told for years and years, you are just a genius when it comes to this stuff. So what made you want to make the Warpig? Like, it was the board of a generation, or like a generational board, where once you came up with this volume shifted idea, everybody else had to come up with their own and everything. How did you come up with that, where you're like, let's make a short wide board that's going to ride 10 centimeters longer than it actually is?
I'll be the first to say that I didn't come up with short and wide stuff, but my interpretation of short and wide was always built off of what I look at as the original for it, and that was the Solomon Derby. To me, that board was like, that was the first iteration that I ever rode of like a short wide. I don't even know if it's really that wide. I can't even really remember how it even looks at this point, but I just remember the first time I got in one at a demo, I was like, this is like the funnest board I've ever been on. I can carve like crazy. It's so fun and snappy. I just want to ride this all day. And so kind of taking that like feeling and wanting to apply more of like a race focused agenda to it. That's kind of how the Warpig came through. So it was like, okay, I want to make a short fat board, but I want to make a short fat board that is not just like a powder board, because anyone can make a powder board. You can ride a door through powder. That's not fun or interesting at all. I want to make something that looks different, that rides like how I like to ride. Like I like to feel like I'm racing gates. And so I looked up like all these different versions of how race boards were made, and finally came down to like a few different side cuts. Basically came through like a number of different side cut versions of like multi-radial side cuts that created this sense of like diving into a gate and accelerating off the back end of the gate. And the biradial side cut that's in a Warpig was really kind of what stood out, made that board ride the way it does. And that's all comes from race board geometries and how you ride a race board, how you ride, GS gates, solemn gates, basically. And I think that's really what gives that board its edge, is that it's looks like a crazy little skateboard, wide enough to be like super fun in powder. The tip and tail are like, you'd think they're just aesthetic, but when you get it in deep snow, they feel like fins and you feel a lot of support from it. And then once you get that thing on edge, it rides like nothing else you've ever been on. So that's where it like really stood out, was that you couldn't really figure out what the board was just by looking at it. You kind of had to get on it and you had to kind of feel it from there. And to me, I've always liked designing things that you're not really sure what it is right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
And that board definitely was like, once you got on it, you were like, this is the board I want to be on for the rest of time.
100%. I mean, I
So
had to buy one myself because of that. I was like, oh my God, like this thing's amazing. You got to have one in the quiver, or at least something of that effect. I'm happy you brought up side cuts because I was going to ask you, what's your take on radial versus like progressive side cuts or blended side cuts? Like, where is one better than the other, or is one totally obsolete at this point in your eyes?
I mean, this is controversial to a few other people, but like my take is that there is no reason to have a radial side cut.
Okay.
I don't see any use case that a radial side cut is like better than a multi-radial progressive side cut. To me, a progressive side cut is a modern way of designing a snowboard.
Mm-hmm.
And radial side cuts are just they're an old way of doing it. Some people are comfortable with it. It's an easy way to design a snowboard. I'll say it that much.
Totally.
Multi-radial progressive side cut, you need to fine tune. You need to develop a good, template for how to build it right. You can really mess it up, or you can do it really well. It's not like it's not like a copy and paste thing. You need to kind of have good like drafting tools to make it work in the right way. And it took a lot of, prototyping and testing and refinement to develop kind of the style that I like designing with multi-radial side cuts. And that was pretty much like what I applied through everything at Ride and what I'm slowly building into the kind of the shaping philosophy with Rome and Bataleon as well.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat with you, where I'm like, radios are all right, but it kind of seemed like you phoned it in a little bit. I mean, especially since we have all of this technology now that like you could probably make a board in like less than a day, have it pressed, and then go ride it and see if that side cut's actually good or not. Does the camber profile matter with how or like what side cut you put on a board?
The way that I kind of prioritize like the features of a board was I always started with side cut, then I did core profile. Core profile was pretty much kind of a stock template that didn't really
Mhm.
change too much because you kind of have your positions where your feet are. You know that you want a little bit of, gap through the middle. You know your progression in the contours of the tip and tail. You can kind of play with the shaping of it a little bit, but there wasn't like too much play that needed to happen core profile. Camber line was pretty much like you kind of have your earlier camber dominant or your rocker dominant profiles. To me, again, another hot take, like multi camber stuff just is not relevant to me. I've never been on a board that had like I don't know, the gull wing, I guess is maybe the more generic way of saying it, but I've never
Mhm.
been on a board that had that I really enjoyed because it never felt like the board was able to fully contour into a turn. And part of what, my take with multi-radial side cut combines with, having a very smooth camber profile so that the board can fully deflex and fully engage the entire edge through a turn. And when you have bumps in your side cut to get grip, or when you have multiple camber lines in your camber, your
Mhm.
board's it's creating all that unevenness in your board to be able to, fully deflex into the turn and get the full contact of your side cut in the snow. And that's the only time you get the full grip from the board. That's the time you feel the full progression of the side cut. Anytime you have, you know, detours in either the side cut or the camber profile, you're always going to feel like the board's not hopping around, but it's not staying true.
Mhm.
And I've never really found a way to do a camber line that is, not just a single arc,
Mhm.
and a side cut that is not, inverse grip tech, I guess, for lack of a different way of saying it. But
Would you say the side cut is the most important part of like the design process in a board then? Like that's the
to
most
me, to me, I think
okay.
side cut is what like makes or breaks a board because in the end, the most like critical performing factor of a board should be how it turns.
Mhm.
Every board should turn well, regardless of what price point it is, tech package it's got, shape it has. Every board should be, optimized to be on the edge. You should always have like your jib board should turn really good on edge. It'll be
Mhm.
soft and kind of noodly, but once you put it on edge, you should feel like like it's turning right. And that's kind of how I design everything from the ground up, is that a board should always turn well and have all the ingredients in it to be able to perform well on edge. And then you just fine tune the little details to get it to perform for either that customer spec that you want to fit into or that terrain spec that you want to fit into.
Who are you designing your boards for? Is it for like just your average customer going out there 5, 10 days a year, or is it for like that pro that we're gonna just kind of translate this to the customer?
I think I was always branded as designing boards for myself back in the day. I don't think I'm doing that now, but generally when we're designing a new board, we start with like a brief for what the price of the board needs to be, who the customer is, like what the terrain style it's going to be ridden at, and kind of just a general sense of like what is the board meant to excel at and where is it supposed to be like focused on. So like right now we're designing a new twin for Bataleon, and it's, we're thinking of it as like a fun twin, like a fun freestyle twin. And that's kind of like the baseline for how we talk about it, is it's like, this is something that is, not necessarily a premium board, a mid-priced board. So kind of a basic construction package with a few extra features. The customer profile is someone who, is fairly like intermediate to advanced, wants to kind of progress, not a beginner, but not a pro, and something that just wants to be able to ride the park, but also ride the whole mountain and have a really good time, accelerating between features, finding transitions, hitting a rail, but also hitting a medium to big jump, kind of finding where your path is down the mountain and kind of designing towards that.
Okay,
So
awesome.
we design towards like the end consumer profile, but that end consumer profile kind of determines whether something is a little bit more pro spec or something is more like progression spec.
Kind of following up on that, do you look at where the industry is going, like for the future, to be like, hey, this board should come out now, or maybe we'll put this one on the back burner since not a lot of people are, say, riding big mountain at the moment. We're going to kind of shift that to the back. We're going to go more towards that park rider. Like, does that come into play at all?
Yeah, I think you always need to look at like the market trend to make sure you're
Hmm.
still staying relevant within things, because otherwise you're going to come out with stuff that just doesn't make any sense to everyone else. Like it, the only one that I will say that like was a weird outlier was the Warpig, to come back to that, because there
Hmm.
was no logic in like that coming through. And when it did launch, it was like no one had any belief that it was going to do anything because they were like not knowing what it was supposed to be. And so there is like when you have those like real big inspirational moments, I think it makes sense to kind of break the mold. But for the most part, you want to pay attention to the trends in the market, understand like what customers are actually looking for. It's not good to always follow the trend, and that's not what we try to do, but we try to make sure that we're still relevant and ahead of things. So creating kind of our own take on something or creating something ahead of what other people are doing, but making sure that we're not, breaking the mold entirely unless we have something that is fully mold breaking and we're ready to like, put 100% behind it.
You want to go with the trends, but you also kind of want to be in the front of that trend as well. And I mean, that
Yeah.
probably is the toughest part, where you're like, how much do you want to extend your neck to actually being like, here's this crazy board I've made, and it's like, is it going to catch on, or am I going to be out of a job, really?
The toughest thing is that we have to plan our product lines like 2, 3 years out.
Hmm.
And so like right now we're working on the products for that'll be shown to shops next year, putting in shops the year after that. We start working on the plans for the year after that as well. So we have to create our product line with like our goal of like, this is our free ride year, this is our freestyle year, and kind of, target our resources and our capabilities in house to make sure we're not overextending ourselves, but also planning ahead, seeing where we have gaps in the line, seeing where we have opportunities for, a new tech idea, and also working towards like 2 year projects that might need a little bit extra time, a little bit more resources to fully develop and refine. So yeah, it's like looking at trends, making sure you're ahead of them or at least within it, but also always looking forward to figure out what you're going to do next. Because if you're always looking at what other people are doing and trying to catch up, then you're always trying to catch up and you're never in front.
Since you have taken over Rome and Bataleon, what was your first move there? Like, do you try to design a board that you guys don't already have, or are you thinking, what can I make better on this current line, and then eventually I'll kind of start dipping my feet in, making like brand new stuff?
With Battalion, it's been a little tough just because the two founders, Danny and Dennis, they
Mhm.
have been designing the boards themselves with help of our French engineer Antoine Poster. They've been doing it themselves for like 20 years, so they have a very like set foundation of what they think a board should be designed like and how they think it should ride. And so I'm slowly breaking down that wall of like, hey, I think we can try some different things. Let's try this out. Let's try this side cut. And we've made some really good headway, and things are
Mhm.
coming through. Like that chameleon behind you was a really good
Oh
first
yeah.
test into things. The surfer that came out that same year is
Mhm.
another really big one. The disaster for this year is a whole new reshape, even though it doesn't really look like it. It's a whole new reshape with a new side cut. So it's kind of like it's a little bit of baby steps, but we're gonna start making some bigger moves into a different way of thinking about what battalion shaping is going forward, which is it's been a long process because battalion is such a they're so rooted in what their kind of foundation tech is
Mhm.
that breaking that mold is a little bit more difficult for kind of that traditional like battalion customer to want to do and to understand a bit. So we're breaking the mold a little bit more. We're kind of trying new things. We've got the green light now to really kind of like not go wild, but like let it rip in terms of new ideas and try some different stuff. So there's a
Sick.
lot
I'm
of
excited.
there's a lot on the horizon that I'm really excited about. And it's I will say this also, like before coming to Battalion, I had no interest in 3D boards.
Mhm.
I hadn't really had a lot of experience with them, so I didn't have, you know, evidence to prove any of that claim, but I just had in my head I just knew I didn't like it. But now I've been on it, now understanding what it's for, understanding that actually the patent for 3BT is a carving technology. My
I
first
wouldn't have
day on the
known.
job in Amsterdam was like mind blowing because Danny and Dennis are telling me about the patent. They're telling me about this Norwegian guy who came up with the idea originally. And I'm just kind of ignoring what they're saying. And I'm looking up the patent because I'm like, whatever, I'm just going to read this patent because I need to know it from that standpoint. And I'm reading the patent and I'm like, wait, this is the headline of the patent is like a snowboard design for the what is it for the most efficient form of turning, something to that extent. And I'm like, wait, this is a turning tech. Like all of this 3BT, this entire concept is built around this like Norwegian scientist guy watching ski racing and coming up with a way that he thinks is an optimized way for a ski to be designed on edge for turning and applying that to snowboards. And when you think about it and we start like getting into the nitty gritty of it, it's like, oh shit, like it allows you to get on a deeper angle. You're able to have way more pressure over your edge when you're on the edge. You get a little bit of that looseness flat base that's just going to come naturally. But once you're up on the edge, you basically create like another layer of side cut with the 3D. And it's been like a whole mind fuck of like trying to wrap my head around like how to think now in 3D terms outside of just a 2D side cut. But it's been, yeah, like there's a lot that we can do. We've learned so much in the last like 2 years of like what we can do with 3BT, what we can change on it, how we can apply side cut differently with the 3BT. It's a whole like it's a whole can of worms that we're really figuring out, and kind of we've got some like good things in the oven right now that feel like crazy good on snow that I'm really hyped on, that we're going to just keep building. And it's going to be kind of, I think it'll be I'm very excited for like Battalion in the next 2 or 3 years because it's going to be a big step.
It has to be challenging going from, as you mentioned, that 2D base to just like here's your side cut to being like, well, now we have another variable in there for actually like lifted contacts. So you're like, well, this changes my contact like point on the snow when I'm just flat basing, all of that. So has that been your biggest challenge with moving over to Battalion? Is just working on different types of like geometry? Because you were with Ride Forever working on just flat
Yeah.
bases, and now you're like the Chameleon has like different versions of 3BT already built into it, where it's like, whoa, that's it's actually very revolutionary for like what Battalion's been in the past.
I think the biggest thing was understanding like what 3BT was, why it was there, what the foundations and the thinking behind it were, and then coming to terms with like, okay, now I understand what it's meant for, and now we can figure out a way to kind of create the next version of it and on take like my experience with Sidecut and build that into a board that has 3D and make something that kind of like is, I don't want, it's not like, I'm not trying to oversell it, but it is like the board we have right now that we've been testing is like crazy fun and crazy good on edge. Like you'd never feel a board, like never felt the board on edge feel so good with being like the flex that it is. And yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for like design progression on the Battalion side, I think, because the 3D just offers a whole different way of looking at stuff. And now that we kind of have the green light to start thinking in different ways with it, it's going to take on a really good path. The tough thing is that now the market is so saturated with 3D stuff that we're trying to
Hmm.
find, we're realizing that like our new way of doing 3D, some other people might have been doing it in kind of similar ways, but not totally the same way. So we're trying to make sure that, you know, our story still tells a Battalion story because we do it a different way than anyone else. We're just trying to find new ways of doing it. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how Battalion has grown as a brand and a technology alongside the rest of the industry that's been also growing and trying to kind of like catch up in some ways to that, but doing it their own way. So on the Rome side, it's kind of a whole different thing because, they don't have 3D in the same way the Battalion does. They have 3D in the tip. And this year we developed a kind of a twin 3D version of it, but it's a totally different style of doing 3D. And with the Rome shapes this year, we got like the biggest opportunity that I've had for shaping. We basically were given the green light to redesign the entire line because we moved factories. We moved from our old factory to Titan. And in doing that, we got to open new tools. And it was like, okay, well, I'm not going to just open the same tools that we had before. Let's redesign as much as we can with the time that we have. So I think we redesigned like 70 to 80% of the line and just did whole new shapes, whole new side cuts, whole new ways of thinking about what the boards are supposed to ride like and how they ride. And yeah, we came up with a lot of good stuff, a lot of fun stuff. The new Ravine is like crazy good. The Service Dog, contender for like my next favorite board. Yeah. Women's boards were all redesigned. The women's Ravine is like super fun on its own right, like trying to be a whole different shape from the men's version of it. Yeah. And on the Rome side, in the same sense as Battalion, it's just like there's nothing but growth that we're going to see from there. We're just progressing new ideas and new shapes every year. So it's really fun kind of working in these two parallel but divergent paths in terms of design. So
Would you say you have the same process for both since they are totally, like you said, different brands? Like, does the process change for you personally, or is it the same one that you're like, here's my formula, I'm just going to stick with it and change a few variables here and there to come out with the product that I'm looking for?
the process in terms of like product brief, consumer profile, terrain profile,
Hmm.
retail price point, that process is consistent across both areas. It's a matter of how what ingredients you put into the board for each brand is different and separate. So for Battalion, we have a very specific way of doing the side cut, specific way of doing the 3D. For Rome, we have, you know, our own set of variables that we mix into that in a different way so that each board, even if they are in a similar category, they ride and have different characteristics, to keep them individual and unique. The thing I never want to do is have too much overlap on things on the board side, because then you create too much of like a question of which board, like, is this just a different color of that brand's board? And I don't want to ever have that conversation. So keep trying
Yeah.
to keep it as different as we can, while still making sure that we're, focusing in on the traits that turning is the priority. Every board should turn well. That's our foundation we build everything off of. So
Okay. So it
Right.
is different, but similar at the same time,
Yeah.
where you can kind of touching on that as well. Would you say, or who would you say is the most particular pro that you've worked with, where they're just like, this board's side cut is a little catchy here in the tail when I'm going to pop and spin, that sort of thing? Like, who's the most just particular about getting their board absolutely dialed in the way they want it?
I would say like the most particular pros are generally the best ones to work with because they're able to communicate and explain their experience really well.
Hmm.
Generally, the ones that are just like, it's stiff, it's soft. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, it's dope. That's like, okay, cool. Thanks for the feedback, but I'm gonna go talk to this one over here because they're giving me like a paragraph and a half about why they liked it or didn't like it. Off the top of my head, like the two people that stand out the most are Blavel and Stale.
Hmm.
Blavel was like, I spent so much time with Blavel going back and forth on his board for ride, and that was just like a huge, knowledge base of trying to figure out, what he had been riding, what he wanted to ride, how he wanted to ride, like, creating so many different boards for him to feel and try to get like understanding of what he wanted out of the board. And with Stale, it's a very similar kind of feeling, and I think they have very similar styles of riding in some ways. Um, Stale is at the same sense, like very particular, very sensitive to like board width and how a board's going to engage and cut. And so it's been really, really fun working with him, trying to figure out, what we can do to his board to make it ride the way he wants to ride. And, he's also evolving as a rider in a lot of ways. Like he came from like big contest kid and now he's, kind of focusing more in a bit more free riding, a bit more like, resort sport type of like, hitting little side kickers and kind of just ripping through the Alps in the ways that he's been doing the last video. So it's really interesting and really fun to kind of work with him in that sense. In Battalion, we're like really trying to get more involvement from the team, more input from them. With the two guys that we've been working with like most closely on team stuff is Tor and Ulrich.
Hmm.
They're both like very, very opinionated, very clear in what they want to see in a board, how they want a board to ride. And we developed the turbo last year basically with that input in mind.
Hmm.
So came through a bunch of different variations of camber and flex and found, basically this like kind of crazy version of camber and flex that worked, that did everything Tor and Ulrich wanted in a board. And we're slowly trying to figure out how we can apply that to other models in the line, how it makes sense for, other types of riders. We're really kind of figuring out all these different variables with the Battalion line that make those boards stand out in different ways. Like I said before, the 3D adds like this whole crazy variable to it all. And you can have a board that rides, you can basically take like the exact same shape, chuck like, a centimeter and a half of camber underneath it, and it'll ride like a totally different board, even though it has like all the same shaping and 3D to it as the other one. And we're kind of like learning all these different little things that haven't been tested yet on 3BT that we can really fine tune and narrow down. And yeah, it's just, there's a lot of little variables in there. But coming back to the team side of things, yeah, Tor and Ulrich are like really good feedback in there. Claudia Medlova, Virginia. We have a Dutch girl, Katja. She's really good with feedback as well. Yeah, it's been a really fun experience trying to figure it out. A lot more languages over here than it was at the
Hmm.
US side. So that's always a fun one.
That actually brings me to my next question. Since once you move, or once you started with Rome and Battalion, you had to move to Amsterdam. So what's that like culturally wise and work wise, like going from the US, from Seattle all the way over there, and just having to deal with pretty much a totally different world almost?
We had like a pretty idyllic little life outside of Seattle. We lived on Vashon Island in a little cabin in the woods. It was very nice. We had one kid. It was a good little time, but we always wanted to move to Europe, my wife and I and the family. So when the opportunity came up, it was kind of like a no brainer. Like, yeah, we just want to move to Europe. We've never lived in a city. We've never lived in Europe, really, for that matter. So it always kind of spoke to us. We wanted to get out here as soon as we could. We had our second kid within like 2 months of moving out here. So the move in process was a lot of things all at once. But yeah, I wouldn't change it for the world now. I mean, we bought a house, we bought an apartment last year. We live in the city. It's Amsterdam is like it feels like you're in kind of like a Disney city sometimes. Like it doesn't feel real. I ride my bike into work every day. I wish the weather was a little bit better, but I can't complain about it too much. Yeah, it's great out here. I love it. We go to the Alps about once or twice a year to go riding, and it's crazy that you just like drive to the Alps.
Yeah.
It's a long drive, but it's like just weird to think that you can drive to like different countries. I don't know. It's also stupid American brain, like not realizing how small everything is over here. But yeah, it's very fun. It was a bit of an adjustment. I will say the work environment is very nice because it is fully snowboard company.
Hmm.
So there's no like everyone is on the same page in terms of like what they want to do and what they're interested and passionate about. And it's very fun to be in that world of where where everyone else wants to be.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's a good time. It's a very enjoyable experience, and yeah, it's just fun living in Europe more than anything.
That's awesome. And I mean, if you get to ride your bike to work every day, that's not a bad thing.
I got like an electric bike that I put the kids in the front. It's a cargo bike. It's very funny. It's a very Dutch thing. It's just like, yeah, it's a very enjoyable weekend and experience too, to just rip around on this little bike with them in the front.
You said you go to the Alps twice a year. What's your setup for when you're getting out there?
So Battalion and Rome have a lodge in Alpbach in Austria. I think they've had it for, I don't know how many years, but it's just at the base of Absolute Park. So there's like the area around it is kind of crazy, and I pronounce everything probably totally incorrect, but yeah, there's like 5 or 6 different mountains within 15-minute drive of the lodge, and you can kind of just wake up in the morning, figure out where the storms were, figure out where the sun's going to be, and just go to that place and just go rip around. And have like resorts here are crazy and huge, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's a very good time. So we'll go to the lodge for different product meetings, different sales meetings, and just ride top to bottom, bell to bell, try a bunch of different products as much as we can. We have a full demo fleet at the lodge with a whole boardroom, so you can kind of go through and try out anything you haven't tried yet. Most of the team comes through at some point in the year, so you get a lot of time and a lot of opportunity to go ride with the team and test stuff with them directly. We currently just leave a bunch of our prototypes at the lodge right now for them to come grab, test, give feedback on. That's going on right now with Ethan and Virginia and Claudia. So it's a really good space and a really good just winter kind of HQ for the brand.
And what's your daily driver for board binding boots? What do you got?
I mean, I'm never on like anything inline, but I would say like my inline, if I had to pick it right now, would be Chameleon 157 from the battalion side, and a service dog 151, maybe a 47, probably a
Okay.
47 if I'm really going to be there. The Ravine is also a hot contender for it in there. Bindings, I'm on the Rome or the battalion phase every day. That thing is like, to get into the binding world, it's a whole different thing, like learning through that process. And Justin and Josh and Maggie and the team in Vermont are like, gods at that. So it's been crazy learning from them and just kind of like helping facilitate as much as I can for that team. But the phase binding, to kind of like jump into that topic, is, to me, it's like a weird game changer. I didn't want to like it at first
Hmm.
because there's no passion in bindings. It's tough to be passionate about bindings. And so I was like, okay, it's whatever. But then you get on snow and you're like, oh shit, this is actually way better than what
Yeah.
I've ever been on. Like,
I mean,
I'm having no problems. I'm not having to adjust anything. My day is just infinitely better already. And I've had to make no sacrifices, compromises, or done anything differently than what I normally would have on a different day. So it's been pretty mind blowing to me. It's fun to read through Reddit comments on what people think about it, because who
yeah.
haven't ridden it yet. But like, to me, it is like the next regular binding. Like, we don't talk about it in terms of like convenience or, you know, auto step on or Supermatic or any of those things.
Hmm.
It is like the next two strap binding. It's just how every binding should be at this point going forward. That's an easier thing said than done because it's a lot of like engineering and development that goes into making it the way it is. But yeah, it's just like a better binding, and there's really no other way to kind of go about it outside of just like I don't really need to ride anything else now.
Well, that actually brings me to my next question, where it was going to be there is a war on bindings, it seems like at this point, where it's either you're going for that fast entry system or you're just a classic two strap. And from the sounds of it, you're like me, where it's like you got on FASE, you're like, let's see what it's about. Oh shit, this is actually really good, and it rides like a real binding. You kind of mentioned it before, but do you think that this will be like say BOA is, where right now there's a few models with it out on the wall, or there will be a few models out on the wall, but as time goes on, are there going to be more and more, and then like just your standard two strap binding is going to almost be the lace boot of the binding world?
I think BOA is definitely the analogy that we are striving for with phase. It's a
Mm-hmm.
bit harder of a use case because BOA is just replacing a lace.
Mm-hmm.
Phase is like a whole system within your heel cup that you kind of need to design around. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
really as plug and play as BOA was back in the day. I will say though that like, what we're seeing is basically no one gives a shit about the rest of the bindings anymore. They just want to ride the phase binding. And
Yep.
so we're seeing a pretty strong momentum towards like there's no need to have these other bindings anymore. We're still going to have them for those riders that want to, still have that traditional feel, that aren't quite ready to make the leap. But I really get the sense that in like 3 years' time, it will be a minority of the market.
Yeah,
The
I'm
majority of
I'm
the market either being, the step on Supermatic or phase.
100%. I think I'm with you on that, especially after being at the Brighton demo last week and speaking with few people from different corporate companies. They were very interested in what do you think about that binding actually? And it's like I tried to break it. I couldn't break it. The thing's almost idiot proof, where it rides like a real binding. It's got all the bells and whistles of a real binding. It's just a little easier to get in and out of once you figure it out. Like once you get that movement in, you're all good to go there, and you don't notice anything about it. So,
It's really crazy. Like, I mean, we were doing like carpet testing with it for
mhm,
months before we got it on snow because we had protos like pretty early in the summer and we didn't have a lot of opportunity to go take it out outside of like the domes that are in Amsterdam and a few other places. We had some testers in South America and New Zealand riding, but you don't really understand it until you're on snow riding it.
mhm.
And when you are like getting off the chair and you just realize, oh, I can just get in now, and I didn't have to think about it. It took me maybe 1.5 runs to like get the motion right. And then after that, it was like, oh, okay, it's done. Like this is it. And
Yeah.
by the time this airs, there is a new team rider coming to phase that will have launched their promo video. I hope by this point that it will, if it hasn't broken the internet by this point, it will. Because it is, I watched it like 2 days ago and I was like, that's fucking sickest thing I've ever seen from one of
Yeah.
the sickest riders. And yeah, it's by the time this launches, it will be very well known to everyone. I'm hoping, but like, there's not going to be a market for like regular bindings. I think very much longer.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And the funny thing about the rider you were talking about is at that Brighton demo, it was 2 days before or something like that. He was let go from his current company, and I was like, he's going to be on phase. And I spread that like wildfire at the demo, and people were like, really? And I was like, I'm just making that up. I'm joking about it. And then
I
literally
love a
the
good
day
rumor.
yeah, and then the
That's
day
sick.
we leave, one of our fans actually hit us up on YouTube and was like, I saw him actually riding those bindings at Timberline, and I was like, oh, okay, that was a great
Yeah.
guess then, because that made a lot of sense to me. But I think you're right with that. I've heard the same thing about that video, and by the time this one comes out, I hope that's dropped, because there's been a few people at his former company actually telling me about that video, and they're like, it was pretty mind blowing stuff going on there actually. And I was like, yeah, that makes the most sense, especially with his style of riding. It speaks volumes to what
This,
that binding actually can do.
yeah.
Like,
It was like the sickest thing I've seen in terms of like a quick little ad, like a promotional video
Yeah.
for a product. I'm like, this is the sickest thing I've ever seen. I want to buy. I don't even work for that brand, but I want to buy that brand's thing now just because of him doing it. Like, fuck. Yeah.
Yeah,
The power of like athlete marketing, basically like fully
it is.
shoved down your face so hard. It was like, wow, okay, that's insane. Reddit's gonna just shit their pants on that one.
People talking about it, like you still have to bend over, and like you still have to bend over for any other fast entry binding. On this one, the only difference is you don't have to bend over as far because it's on your ankle instead of on your heel cup. So like, and it's more intuitive to what we've been pretty much taught since we started snowboarding is just
Exactly. Yeah.
release that, get out, you're good to go. Like, but
The
yeah,
like hardest adjustment that I had to make was not undoing the toe strap.
yeah,
Like, and we have like some thoughts in place for how to like, simplify that area a bit more in the future. But like, it took me, that was the only real adjustment, was like getting it out of my head that I needed to unclick both straps.
luckily on mine, my toe straps locked pretty well where I'd go to take it out, and if my boot was in there, it didn't want to come out, and I was like, oh yeah, that one doesn't go. But yeah, I was in the same thing with you about 2 runs, and I was like, oh, I understand how this works. I got the mechanics down, no problems there. Like, I think it's very intuitive to just how you regularly step out of a binding. Kind of moving on as well, since we've talked about boards and bindings, we should probably talk about boots, especially because Battalion, as of this year, has gotten into the boot game. So for boots, bindings, and boards, do you try to, like, say, come up with the chameleon, and then you're like, where in the line do we have, or what in the line do we have for, say, a binding for it and a boot? Or is it just like, we'll make something around what we have here?
We don't necessarily build like a binding for a board or a boot for a binding type situation. We're
Mhm.
still building it out for like a customer. And,
Okay.
obviously in that Venn diagram of a customer and terrain and price profile, you're going to have, your cross merch opportunities in there. So a lot of that, if there is like a direct visual connection to a board or a binding, it's usually done through like a graphic merch story. So like on
Okay.
this year for the chameleon, I believe the Etna has a graphic connection towards it for merch opportunities. But in general, like they're all kind of separate categories. We design them for, in a different scale, but there's always going to be that like this binding works well for this style of rider, and that style of rider would work well for that board.
Okay.
Vis-a-vis, that's the board you should ride with that binding type thing. But I'm not really ever designing like a specific boot or a binding for a board or other ways.
Okay.
But
That's
yeah,
that's
yeah,
actually really great to know because I think a lot
yeah.
of people do see it and they're like, "Oh, that boot matches that binding and that board, so I should probably buy that." And it's good to know that you guys are like, "Well, that's just a color scheme, but in reality, you should go with whatever actually fits, say in a boot terms, fits your foot the best and the flex that you're looking for."
Yeah.
Do you do a lot of the boot stuff? I know you oversee a lot of design in general, but do you have your hands in the boots at all or like give a lot of feedback on them, or are those that team just dialed in and know exactly what they're going for and you just kind of trust that process?
So with our boot team, we have 3 designers that we work with, and they work kind of closely with our creative director, Danny. And I basically just help facilitate the product line planning and the feedback summarization, and basically giving them the structure to design a line that makes the most sense for the brand and meets our
Mhm.
customers' needs and our sales needs. So I'll help give feedback in terms of like, this boot's not working really well for this style of riding, but just having an engineering and a product design mind, I'm always giving, trying to give input or trying to give ideas and, toss things around with them. And for the most part, they're very open to that input. And I don't think I've given too many bad ideas, but yeah, it's not my area of expertise, so I'm learning with them as they go through it. But it is very fun to learn a new category, to learn all the ins and outs of what can and can't be done, and also trying
Mhm.
to like again break the mold of like we should try something different in here, taking a few different ideas from like how we design a snowboard in terms of like what makes a snowboard ride well. Let's think about what makes a boot ride well, what makes a binding ride well. Obviously, they're not going to be a one-to-one situation, but just understanding what your body position and how you want to ride a snowboard, you can apply that same kind of like foundational ideas to a boot and a binding setup in the same sense. It's a bit more
Awesome.
nuanced in that way, and a bit more like more thinking to go into it. But yeah, if you know how to design a snowboard well, you know how to ride and explain your riding, and that's kind of the basics of how you design a product well for the other categories. So
Yeah. And I mean,
yeah, but
in my
the boot
mind,
team is dialed, so they've been doing it for a long time. Maurizio, our lead designer, he came from Burton originally, and yeah, he's got so much experience in it, and he's like had a really good time working with Danny to create more modern and unique designs and making things a bit more like bringing kind of more of like a street fashion style to the boots while still integrating like a lot of technical progression in them. Like our new acid boot this year, if you saw it, the demo is like nothing you've ever seen before. Rides like nothing you've ever seen. It's crazy fun boot. It's a lot of boot to take on for a lot of people, but it's a lot of it shows where we're willing to go in the boot world. So we're not going to play it safe. We're going to really expand and try different things and really kind of do whatever we can to do things differently.
totally. I mean, I think actually Avran has a pair of those boots currently as we
Yeah,
speak,
I'm
and
sure he would like them.
yeah, he's trying them on. He's doing a breakdown of them and everything. But on it, like your guys' boots for doing them, I think we got them. Was it 2 years ago? We got them last year,
Yeah.
and just to like video check out, kind of dissect a little bit. And it's just a really well made boot. Like for the first year of you guys doing them, you knocked it out of the park. Everybody I've talked to at the mountain, I'm like, "Oh, you got battalion boots. What do you think?" And they're like, "Best boot I've ever put on my foot." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, it
Hey,
fits you well."
nice.
And they're like, "It fits amazing."
Yeah.
And I was a little concerned at first when I think we got sent like a pair of size sevens or something, and I went to flex that boot with my hands, and I was like, "Whoa, that's stiff." Went and put them on, and it was like, "Oh, never mind. Okay, that's just kind of how it was when we got it." But yeah, what you guys have done with boots is absolutely remarkable, especially for only being in it for 1 year. Where I'm stoked to see
Yeah.
what you guys do in the future as well. Like just
Yeah.
because boots are my favorite thing. Like if a boot doesn't fit your foot right, it's just totally shot, and like you're gonna have a terrible day out there riding. So in my mind, it's the most important part of your gear, and like just to see companies really kind of taking that to heart as well and really putting a lot of effort in to try to make that comfortable performance boot is huge in my eyes, especially to grow the
Yeah,
sport.
for sure. And I mean, I chalk it up all to the team in Switzerland for us developing that through because, you know, we could never have done it without their wealth of knowledge and foundation and experience and the team in China that helped develop all the samples for us. Like it's been a huge opportunity that, you know, I don't think any other brands have really expanded that much in 2 years with the new boot line. And yeah, it was huge. It was a big undertaking last year, and it's a big undertaking with the expansion of the line we have this year. And we're just going to keep growing on that year over year and making sure that we're like constantly focused on fit, tech, and just the look of it all. And I think that's the biggest thing is making sure that it's like stands out on its own as like a different boot from the rest of the shelf wall.
Well, totally. And it's a low profile boot, which I think is
Yeah.
huge, especially for today's day and age where a lot of people are saying like boards are getting wider, but in the same sense, like hate to go back to ride, but like Blavelt's pro model, the Berserker, that thing is one of the most narrow boards still like to this day where it's like my size 10 almost boots out on that 56. Like, so I bump up to the 59 and it's like, to have a smaller, low profile boot is huge in my eyes, especially because you don't want something giant and bulky when you're like walking around the base
Yeah.
area. And that just means more foam to pack out for it to get bigger, break down more, just, you know. So I love what you guys are doing there. That's amazing. I can't wait to see what Avran says about them once he actually gets them on his feet and rides them for a little
Sick.
bit. But, and then before we get out of here, I got a couple more questions for you. What sort of durability testing do you use for Rome and Bataleon on the boards side? And did you come up with the process?
So the process we use at Titan right now is pretty extensive. We do a sidewall impact test. We have a slap test that kind of does a full slap of the tip and the tail. That tests basically how well the layers are bonded together and
Hmm.
how durable the board is going to be as you come onto a hard impact or land after a big jump. Um, we do a number of different peel tests for adhesion on the top and the base. So kind of like your basically stock level of tests. We don't do anything really like out of the ordinary in that sense. It's a pretty good, solid, controlled test lab scenario at the factory. We don't have anything out of house for that nature, so we kind of rely on them to develop the tests, maintain the tests, and every time we go over there for our kind of annual factory trips, we make sure to do a QC audit of the whole operation and facility to make sure we're still meeting the needs and meeting all the specs that we have them outlined to. So,
Okay. And do you
yeah.
run those tests like, say you're making 100 boards in a batch of like 100 chameleons at the time? Do you grab one of those out of that and then test that batch, or is it more of these have all had the same materials, sourced from the same place, same epoxies, all that stuff? We can just test the whole run after the fact, or
We kind of like front load a lot of our durability testing in the early development stages when we're still coming up with a new shape and a new construction.
Mhm.
We'll use all those tests as much as we can to make sure that construction meets all the needs as much as possible and that we're not going in production with something that's questionable. And then in production, I forget what our sample rate is off the top of my head, but we have a standard sample rate of pulling a couple boards from the production line, throwing them through the QC tests, making sure that it's still in check of everything. And in the event that anything comes out, not up to quality, we run the test with another one. And there's a pretty standard acceptable quality limit that you have within that, and a simple process for how you pick out statistically, your batch runs from that and pull out more boards if you're having issues with something. And then we track that back to a serial number to see if we can find where the root cause is of something, if we need to quarantine a production run or do any more due diligence to make sure, a problem is isolated and dealt with within the production line. But we don't really have too many of those issues. Most of the times that QC and durability testing up front is enough to hedge against any larger problems down the road. It all comes down to like experience and consistency in your processes on the production floor. And that's really what we kind of hone in on for the most part when we're doing a lot of our audits at the factory floor.
yeah, I guess the one last question I have for you is what is the most underrated part in snowboarding to you?
The most underrated part of snowboarding,
Yeah.
I think, is the turn. I feel like
Okay.
we take the turn for granted. I feel like everyone thinks that, you can't, you can't, you can't hit the park without turning to get to the park. If your board doesn't turn well, your board's not going to be fun. And so, like I said, like always design a board to turn well. And if the board turns well, it will always be a fun board, regardless of whether it's super soft or super stiff. You can design and fine tune it for any specific rider or terrain, but it always has to turn well. And yeah, I think the most underrated part of snowboarding is the turn, because you think about like where your terrain is, but you forget that like I'm always going to be turning either on that terrain, or to get to that terrain, I need to be turning. And so, and now, I mean, it also is like that's all I do nowadays because my knees are bad, my back's bad. I got 2 kids, so I'm like, I'm not hitting the big jump anytime soon or doing anything important over a big jump. So like all I want to do is turn. And all I want to do is turn well and find that body position that lets me, feel the full arc of a turn, change my turn shape. There's so much you can do within a turn. And I really love watching all these like Japanese and like Chinese and Korean carving videos nowadays, because it's like ground trick was always a thing in Japan that we thought was going to take on the rest of the world. And that kind of fizzled out a little bit. But I feel like that more high energy freestyle, like carving, is going to come a bit more because it's a lot more approachable. You're not having to hit a big icy kicker. You're just turning
Hmm.
well. I hope that catches on, because then it'll mean I'm trending, but yeah.
I think that trend's coming around. Like
I
the
hope
more I
so.
talk
I hope
to
so.
talk
Yeah.
to people, especially like riders, people in the industry, they're just like I'm like, what do you like to do? And they're like, I just like to make some turns out there. And they're like, yeah, that's nice. Like just dipping the knee down, pressing some pickle, and really just getting low is still fun in my book. Like,
I do like all the
but
different terms for turning. My favorite is
yeah,
digging trenches.
yep,
Making railroad lines was one. Yeah, there's a lot of good ones out there. I like,
they are
what
red.
did you say? Dipping pickle?
Pressing pickle.
Pressing pickle. That's a good one. I
Yep.
hate pickles, but that's a good one. I like that.
Feel free to change it to whatever Dutch term works with that one once you learn it.
I think I think pickles would be relevant over here, so maybe they're comfortable with that.
But thank you for joining me. It's been
No problem.
awesome. Very, very insightful. I had a great time doing this. You're truly a master at what you do. So
Well,
I
thank you so
appreciate you
much.
coming on, taking the time out of your day. I mean, running two brands must be absolutely just exhausting after talking with people that only are the head of one. They're like, dang, dude, two. And they're like, yeah. And especially, I mean, like you said, Rome's got a huge change coming. You're working more and more on just battalion stuff. Actually, one last question. Can we expect to see more rolled sidewalls in the future?
Yes.
Okay.
Um, we're trying to do it the shape that I was alluding to for battalion. We're coming full circle and things. So think of a rolled sidewall as far as you can roll it
Okay.
without telling you exactly what it is. But yeah,
Yep. Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you for
gonna
joining.
come back.
Dude, it a comeback. Like it turned really well, so I can't complain about it. But thank you for joining. I look forward to having you on again. You'll be our first
Yeah,
ever
for sure.
reoccurring
Anytime.
guest. And I'm sure we can get way more nerdy with it and stuff. But for the first time, we'll keep it kind of broad. And once
Sounds
that new
good.
board comes out, I'll have you on, and we can go spec for spec on that thing.
There's two of them in Seattle right now. So if you get a chance to make it up there, ask around for it and try it out.
Sick, awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks a lot.